Hello and welcome back to Bookish. It's Tag Tuesday, and I was lucky enough to be tagged to do the Reading the Humanities tag. This is an original tag from Richardson Reads. I'll leave a link to his original tag video down below. And essentially, this is a tag in which you talk about your reading in all kinds of areas of the humanities, or you relate things you've read to different areas of the humanities. So I'll get right into it. Prompt number one says, one book or author that uses anthropology in their work. This was a tough one for me. Anthropology is not an area in which I read a lot, but I do like Louise Erdrich's books quite a bit. And Louise Erdrich, being part Native American, frequently includes elements of Native American culture and ritual and belief in her books. And, culture, ritual, belief, those are aspects of anthropology, I believe. So I'm going to go with Louise Erdrich. I've read The Roundhouse and I've read La Rose. I'm planning on reading Love Medicine soon, and then I want to read Plague of Doves. Anyway, there are a lot of Louise Erdrich's books I want to read, and I believe that qualifies as people who use anthropology in their work. So prompt number two is to name a book or author who uses archaeology in their work. This was also tough because, believe it or not, I don't just read a lot of authors who center their stories around archaeology. At least I couldn't think of one until I remembered this book, which is Austerlitz by W.G. Sebald. W.G. Sebald, I believe this was his last book, and I believe he died sometime, I want to say, in the early 2000s. And essentially, this is a book about a historical archaeologist, essentially, who finds out that his parents were victims of the Holocaust, that he was sent away to live in England for safety's sake from Czechoslovakia, and it's essentially about his journey back to the places where he lived as a child, about discovering about what happened to his mother and his father, and it's kind of related as him telling the story to the person who actually narrates the story. It's to me a really powerful and moving book, and a book I oftentimes forget to include on my list of favorites. So Austerlitz, I believe that's a book that deals with archaeology. So prompt number three, it says, have you read a work of ancient Greece or Rome, and what was it, and what's your favorite? Well, this was kind of hard for me because I have to tell you, for a person who is a history major and has an advanced degree or a master's degree in history, I haven't read a lot of ancient Greek and Roman history. It's a real kind of hole in my education and my knowledge, but I have read the Annals of Imperial Rome by Tacitus or Tacitus. I can't remember which way you pronounce his name, and I really enjoyed this. It was kind of, a fairly dense read, and, in my Penguin Classic copy, the print's relatively small, and from time to time I kind of lost the thread of who and what he was talking about. But I also kind of like it because it's in some ways sort of a gossipy discussion about the emperors of Rome and their reigns and things like that. And so I enjoyed this. So I'll go with Tacitus as my example of a work from ancient Greece or Rome. Prompt number four is about history. Do you have a favorite time period that you read about? What is it? And are there any books that you really like? So being a historian, I have lots of favorite time periods in history, but if I'm being completely honest with myself, I think World War I and that era and on to the 1920s are probably my favorite time period. I also enjoy reading about the 1950s quite a bit here in the United States. And, I have read fairly extensively works of history about World War I. And, while there are works of fiction about World War I, which I could name, which I've already talked about in other videos, like Through the Wheat by my man Thomas Boyd, I thought I'd talk about some actual works of history. One of my favorites, and one of the ones I think has had the most influence over me is on me and my kind of studies as a historian, is The Great War and Modern Memory by Paul Fussell. Paul Fussell is a little bit controversial, or was a little bit controversial for a while for some of his opinions, but his book here about World War I essentially relates how we remember World War I through literature and through art and through film. And this kind of led me directly into, an independent study in my master's work about historical accuracy in American World War I fiction. It led me to Thomas Boyd, and it led me to, my only real successful attempts to get things published having to do with Thomas Boyd. So that's certainly one of them. And my absolute favorite World War I book, though, is a book I've mentioned here before. I believe it's in my top 10 list for the video I did for Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse. And it's The Beauty and the Sorrow and Intimate History of the First World War. And this actually looks at individuals through their diaries and letters and how World War I affected them. And I just thought it was a really powerful and incredibly good work of history. Let's see, prop number 5 is about linguistics or languages. Reading is all about language, so can you name a favorite translated work of literature? Well, my answer to that, and again, if you follow my channel for any period of time, my answer for that would be essentially anything by Honoré de Balzac. Balzac is my absolute favorite classic author, and every year I try to read a couple of titles from Balzac, and since he wrote so much, assuming I can find them in print, I should never run out. This is Père Goriot, which is one of my favorite novels by Balzac, and it's translated from the French, by the way, if you didn't know. Question number 6 is law and politics. Do you read political books or books related to law, and what are your favorites? This also kind of stumped me. I don't know that I read a lot of books that are strictly speaking political. I don't really enjoy political essays or political editorials that have been collected in books. I have a few books by Hunter S. Thompson that are, theoretically political. I have a book of newspaper editorials by one of my favorite former political commentators, Molly Ivins, but I don't really read that much in there, so I thought I would just talk about the fact that I have read a significant number of presidential biographies. Obviously nowhere near as many as someone like Steve Donahue, but so one of those would be this biography of Truman by David McCullough. I have a tendency to prefer popular presidential biographies rather than the more academic ones. I have some of those too, but oftentimes academics, I feel like, get caught up in a lot of the minutiae and detail that I'm not particularly interested in, and while they probably portray the presidency and their political motives in, much more accurately and in more detail, they're not nearly as usually as interesting to read. So prompt number 7 says literature does not have a universally accepted definition. What is yours? So for me, and this is something I tried to think of while I was looking to prompt, for me, literature is an attempt to capture, explain, explore the human condition in ways large and small through the use of the written word. That's my definition of literature. So pretentious or foolish, or maybe, heck, it's possible that I read that somewhere and it got stuck in my brain and I'm just passing it off as mine. That's entirely possible too. So prompt number 8 says philosophy is the love of wisdom. Have you read philosophy? Do you have a favorite? I haven't read a lot of philosophy either, to be honest with you. In all honesty, most of my reading is kind of confined to fiction and reading history in lots of ways. I have read some general books, kind of covering philosophy in a broad sense, and some awareness, of the ideas and works of some philosophers. But if I were to be honest with you, the area of philosophy in which I've read the most is probably existentialism, but not existentialist works of philosophy necessarily, but novels written by existentialist philosophers like The Age of Reason here, which is a part of John Paul Sartre's, Road to Freedom. These are 3 novels about France during World War II, and I enjoyed those. And I also enjoy the work of Albert Camus quite a bit. The Stranger, The Plague, I like his works as well. And so that would be my answer, really, where I'm reading fiction that's written by philosophers or related to existentialist philosophy. Prompt 9 is religion. Name a book that has influenced your view of religion. Well, to me, the most influential book about religion in my life is this really well-worn old copy of the Upanishads, or the Upanishads, again, depending on pronunciation. I got this book quite some time ago, and a lot of it is actually introduction. And it's probably about as much of the Upanishads as I am up to reading at this point, but there's just some really great passages, some things that I just think are our true wisdom, our kind of universal truths that are contained in my little copy of the Upanishads, and I refer to it frequently when I'm looking for, some kind of meaning or something kind of deeper in life. So question number 10 is about the performing arts, musicology. Do you have a favorite performer? If so, why does their work appeal to you? So this question confused me a little bit. Is it just about musicians? So if that's the case, I have to tell you that my favorite musicians are the members of the band Rush. And I tried to think of something that was more recent, something that kind of moved me a lot more recently and that I really liked. But I'll be honest with you, I became a hardcore Rush fan in the 1980s, and I've never really lost that. I think that one of the appeals of their music is its complexity. For being rock and roll music, its relative complexity, the fact that they were willing to embrace change and change their sound so often, and then the lyrics are relatively literary for rock and roll music. And so, that's probably my favorite musical act. We're just talking about performers, as in actors or actresses. Then I would say that my favorite actresses are in this order probably: Kate Winslet, Emma Thompson, and Saoirse Ronan, and my favorite actor would be probably Ralph Fiennes, Kenneth Branagh, people like that. And while I've never seen their performances in anything other than movies, I oftentimes find their performances really moving. Oh, and then prompt number 11 is the visual arts. What's your favorite visual art media? And then do you have a favorite artist in that media? Well, my favorite visual art is painting, and I have a lot of favorite painters. So just to kind of run down a few, not in chronological order, but I would go with my favorites are Cézanne, Vermeer, Magritte, Edward Hopper, Titian, Rembrandt, and then Franz Klein, the abstract expressionist Franz Klein. Those were probably my favorite visual artists. Anyway, there you go. That's my answer to the Reading the Humanities tag. Thanks again to Richardson Reads for tagging me. I will, if I think of some people I want to tag who I don't think have already been tagged or have seen this, I'll put the names of those channels in the video below, or hey, I might just scroll them up the screen starting right now. Anyway, thanks for watching.